Good day, children. I'm teacher Sulan Rodriguez. I hope all of you are fine and keeping in good health by the grace of God. Today, we will be doing chapter 9 of geography, that is tourism, transport, and communication. We will first compare tourism between Brazil and India. A look at this polyline graph will show that in the years between 1995 and a little before 2010, Brazil attracted more international tourists than India. The reasons were the clean, white, sandy beaches of Brazil, attractive sea coasts, beautiful islands, orchards, dense forests of the Amazon with their exotic birds and animals. Also, the new capital city of Brasilia, which was very, very beautiful, and other cities like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo also attracted lots of tourists because of their scenic beauty. Tourism was also an important economic activity in several regions in the country. Also, looking at the sensitivity of the natural resources that were there in Brazil and their uniqueness, ecotourism started developing at a very fast rate in Brazil. But if you look at this polyline graph, you will notice again that from the year 2010 onwards, the number of international tourists visiting India has increased. This is because of new avenues which have developed in tourism, like adventure sports have developed, medical tourism has developed, where a lot of people from other countries find medical health quite inexpensive in India as compared to other big nations, and therefore they start flocking to India in order to gain medical attention. Also, you have business tourism, where people or businessmen from other countries come and establish multinational industries in India. Ecotourism is also being given a boost in India. Also, new tourist spots are being developed because of beautiful monuments and heritage sites which are being unearthed. The different unique and varied cultures that are observed in India, the natural beauty of various regions in India, all these are attracting lots of tourists to India, because of which the number of international tourists visiting India has increased tremendously, especially after 2015. If you look at this figure, it is a compound bar graph based on tourism and economy of 2016, which shows the percentage of population engaged in tourism and contribution of tourism to the gross domestic product in Brazil and India. Now, if you look at this compound bar graph, you will notice that though the number of international tourists visiting India in 2015 is more than the proportion of Indian population, and it is more than the number of tourists visiting Brazil, the proportion of Indian population in tourism is also higher than that of Brazil. But the contribution to the GDP or the money earned from tourism is less than that of Brazil. This is because the percentage of people working in other occupations is more than those working in tourism. So the contribution from tourism to the gross domestic product appears less. In order to help you understand this better, let me give you an example. Suppose Brazil has a population of 50 people, of which 10 are engaged in tourism. On calculating the percentage, you will get 20% as a contribution to the gross domestic product. Now, suppose India has a population of 200 people, which is much more than 50 people that were there in Brazil. And out of these, 20 people are engaged in tourism in comparison with the 10 of Brazil. On calculating this percentage, you will get only 10% as a contribution to the gross domestic product. So primarily, the size of the population of these two countries affects the size of the gross domestic product. We move on to transport. We will compare transportation between Brazil and India. Now, if you look at this map of Brazil, you will see there are roadways, railways, waterways, and airways also in Brazil. But the most common method of transportation in Brazil is roadways. Roadways account for more than half of the transportation system in Brazil, which means that there is a dense network of roadways in Brazil. The Trans-Amazonian Highway is a major highway in Brazil, and it connects the city of Brasilia to the western part of Brazil. But if you look at this map carefully, you will notice the density of road network is concentrated mostly in the eastern part of the country. The forested lands of the Amazon River basin and the swampy regions of the central part of Brazil have limited development of roadways. We come to railways. Again, looking at the map, you can see railways have not developed very well in Brazil. The use of trains for long distance transportation of passengers is restricted to a few urban tourist centers, even though railway transportation is much cheaper in Brazil. Again, the reason for this is the forested lands of the Amazon River basin and the swampy regions of the central part of Brazil. The contribution of airways is very less in the transportation system of the country. Very few airways are there in Brazil. Waterways have been developed on a very big and on a commercial basis in the Amazon basin. Boats fly from Iquitos in Peru, which is a neighboring country, to the mouths of the rivers in Brazil. Brazil has one of the longest waterways in the world, which is around 3,700 kilometers long. And all these waterways which are there are used for navigation. The south flowing Parana River is also used for navigation. Coastal shipping is also carried out in the coastal areas. Let's have a look at the transportation system in India. As compared to Brazil, India has a denser network of transportation, especially roadways and railways. About 85% of passengers and 70% of freight traffic is carried on by roads every year. Freight and passenger transportation has been facilitated due to the development of railways. In India, railways are a very important mode of transportation. Railways are primarily very important for the growth of Indian economy because a lot of freight, that is goods, are transported over this vast land of India using railways. Railway network is relatively less dense in the hilly states, the northeastern states, the central part of India, and the desert regions of Rajasthan. while railway network is very dense in the North Indian plains, which are flat. Waterways in India cover rivers, canals, backwaters, and even creeks. Waterways are a very cheap means of transportation, especially of goods. Waterways in India contribute to about 1% of the country's transportation. Approximately 95% of India's foreign trade moves through ocean routes. Apart from international trade, waterways are also used for the purpose of transportation between the islands of India and the rest of the country. Islands like islands that are there in the Arabian Sea, that is the Lakshadweep Islands, and islands that are there in the Bay of Bengal, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. As compared to Brazil, airways in India are much more developed, and the use of internal airways, that is domestic airways, is also increasing a lot. We will now have a look at communication between India and Brazil. Now, because of the vast longitudinal extent of Brazil, the difference between the westernmost point and the easternmost point of Brazil is around 168 minutes. That is 2 hours and 48 minutes. So there are different time zones seen in Brazil. If you look at this map that is given, you will notice Brazil has 4 time zones or time divisions. All the 4 time zones are behind the Greenwich Meridian time by 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, or 5 hours, moving from east to west respectively. The red line on the map shows the time zone of the official or the Brazilian Standard Time, BRT for short. The Brazilian Standard Time is behind the Greenwich Meridian time by 3 hours. If you look at this map of India, the difference between the easternmost point and the westernmost point in India is 2 hours or 120 minutes. This difference is, of course, lesser than that of Brazil. India has only one standard time zone. The Indian Standard Time or IST is based on the local time on the 82.5 degree east longitude, which passes through Allahabad. The Indian Standard Time is ahead of the Greenwich Meridian time by 5 hours and 13 minutes. Let us compare the development of communication between Brazil and India. Now, telecommunication services in Brazil are very well developed and very efficient. This industry includes landlines as well as mobile services, televisions, and radio broadcasting, and access to computer and internet. Today, more than 45% of the Brazilian population has access to the internet. Telecommunication infrastructure is very modern in the central part and the southern part of Brazil. But in the north and northwestern part, it is very less due to the nature of the Brazilian territory. Also, the landmass size in the north is much wider, and there are large pockets of unpopulated areas because of dense vegetal areas or dense forests, which hamper the coverage and expansion of telecommunication services. But Brazil is developing technology to send domestically made satellites into space for telecommunication purposes using its own rockets. The Brazilian Space Agency, or AEB, is a civilian authority or a civilian industry which is responsible for Brazil's expanding space program related to telecommunication. The Brazilian Space Agency has pursued a policy of joint technological development, that is, using the help of other countries, other developed countries, in order to develop its technology. And it has made use of more advanced space programs related to telecommunication. On the other hand, India is much more developed where communication is concerned. With the explosion of electronic media, the telecommunication industry has become one of the fastest growing sectors in India. India is one of the largest users of smartphones and the internet. More digitally enhanced communication devices like mobile phones, internet, and satellites have paved the way for expansion of communication technology and have also made it more accessible to many people in India. ISRO, that is India's Space Research Organization, looks after the space launching programs of India which are related to telecommunication. We will now do these activities to calculate the time difference between Brazil and India. Let's look at the first problem. Now, suppose if it is 12 noon at Delhi, what would be the local time in Brasilia? Now, since Brazil lies to the west of India, to calculate the local time at Brasilia when it is 12 noon at Delhi, you have to first calculate the difference between the time at Delhi and the Greenwich Meridian time, as well as the difference between the Greenwich Meridian time and the time zone in which Brasilia falls, which means the time at Delhi, which is 12 o'clock, minus the difference in the Greenwich Meridian time and the time at Delhi. That difference is 5 hours and 30 minutes, along with, or in addition to that, the difference between the Greenwich Meridian time and the Brasilia time zone, and that is 3 hours, which means 12 or 12 o'clock minus 5:30 plus 3 will give you 8 hours 30 minutes, which amounts to 3 hours and 30 minutes. So if it is 12 noon at Delhi, it will be 3:30 a.m. at Brasilia. Let's look at the second problem. Saurabh and Ashwini work for a MNC. Two of their regional head offices are located in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro and Manaus, respectively. Both of them have to contact either of these head offices constantly, as they have to adjust timings according to their head office, find out their corresponding timings in India if they work according to the office timings in Brazil. And the office timings in Brazil are 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So now we have to calculate the corresponding timings in India. Now the Greenwich Meridian time is ahead of Brazil's standard time, or BRT, by 3 hours. And India is ahead of the Greenwich Meridian time by 5 hours and 30 minutes. Therefore, if the Brazilian time or the Brazilian standard time is 10 a.m., then to calculate the Indian standard time, we have to add the Brazilian standard time to the difference between the Brazilian standard time and the Greenwich Meridian time, plus the difference between the Greenwich Meridian time and the Indian standard time. That is 10 a.m. plus 3. 3 is the difference between the Brazilian uh, Brazilian time, standard time, and the Greenwich Meridian time. And 5 hours and 30 minutes is a difference between the Greenwich Meridian time and the Indian Standard Time. This amounts to 18:30 or 6:30 p.m., which means when it is 10 a.m. in Brazil, it is 6:30 p.m. in India. Now let us calculate the time in India when the time is corresponding to 5 p.m. in Brazil. Now, if the Brazilian Standard Time is 5 p.m., then to calculate the Indian Standard Time, which corresponds to this time, you will have to add the Brazilian Standard Time to the difference between the Brazilian Standard Time and the Greenwich Meridian Time, plus the difference between the Greenwich Meridian Time and the Indian Standard Time. That is 17 hours or 5 p.m. plus 3 hours. 3 hours is the difference between the Brazilian Standard Time and the Greenwich Meridian Time. To this, you will also add 5 hours and 30 minutes. 5 hours and 30 minutes being the difference between the Greenwich Meridian Time and the Indian Standard Time. This amounts to 25:30. Now, one day is made up of 24 hours. So, 24 hours, that's 12 midnight or 0 hours plus 1 hour 30 minutes, which means 1 hour 30 minutes the next day. So if it is 5 p.m. in Brazil, it would be 1:30 a.m. the next day in India. So Saurabh and Ashwini would be working from 6:30 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. the next day in India. These are the timings that correspond to 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. in Brazil. For your assignment, you will work on the third problem. That is, a plane leaves Brasilia at 11 a.m. on 31st December. The plane crosses zero meridian and reaches Vladivostok via New Delhi. Tell the local time, date, and day at New Delhi and Vladivostok when the plane leaves Brasilia. You will work on this problem. Thank you, girls. Have a nice day.